Hey there, all. Yeah, that kind of partially cut out, so that's part one. Part two, I do want to move on to the intro to the French New Wave. So let me just bring it up here and go into a little bit of that background, if you don't mind. The French New Wave starts emerging during post-war itself, and there's a series of things that sort of are important background to it. One's the Cinémathèque Française, many ways responsible by Henri Langlois. Here it starts in 1936, and it's a completely democratic type of institution, meaning it didn't prioritize good films over bad or classic films over new. It showed everything all the time, and in many ways, many of the directors who became part of the French New Wave would go to this religiously, the Cinémathèque Française, and just indulge in a lot of films, Hollywood, both A and B films, independent films, foreign films, avant-garde. It showed everything. Um, Also, France had a lot of cineclubs, Objectif 49 and Studio Parnasse. It was a very film-centric culture that in many ways enabled a lot of the French New Wave filmmakers to get a really good schooling. Many of them were critics before they were actually filmmakers itself. These are some of the core journals that many of them wrote for or read at the time. Postif, which was a Marxist journal, fusing kind of old and new ideas. Cinema 55, here address industry news and interviews with technicians, distributors, and producers. Le Cron, uh, more traditionally stuffy leftist, despising Hollywood films, liking independent films itself, and perhaps most famously, Cahiers du Cinema, where many of the new wave wrote and had a rigorous revision policy, really prioritized interviews in ways, not superficial interviews like "Did you like this actor?" or whatnot, but really getting into depth about the background. And a lot of the French New Wave were a part of this. Godard, Francois Truffaut, so on and so forth. In many ways, they're the first group of extremely cinema literate directors to exist. You could argue the Russians were also the Soviets, um, but they still didn't have as much access as the French did at that time. They believed in directors having control over their films made by a small group of individuals, shot cheap, fast, and on the sly, right? Really kind of intimate type of filmmaking was really important. I can't show you it here, but nonetheless, 1959 is a breakout year because three major films come out at that time. Hiroshima Mon Amour by Alain Renaud, which in many ways doesn't stand up the test of time. It's kind of corny. There's Breathless by Godard that comes out, sort of based loosely on B film noir films, so it's worth checking out in case you want to see that. And The 400 Blows by Francois Truffaut, kind of more classically shot film that's considered one of the greatest of the French New Wave. Although they had a lot of differences, and these three films have a lot of stylistic differences, Hiroshima Mon Amour was very experimental and kind of avant-garde. Breathless was both experimental and kind of B film together, and then The 400 Blows was more kind of classically shot type of Hollywood-like type of cinema. Nonetheless, there's a lot of commonalities between the groups of people making these films, often shot on location and often prioritizing Paris, shot with handheld cameras, small crews, personalized style, focus on sexuality and relationships, often kind of humorous, and you can feel the Italian neorealist influence on these films shot on location with very minimalist scripts, so on and so forth. You'll see this a lot in Cleo from 5 to 7 by Agnes Varda. Varda theoretically transgressed the new wave. She was also part of the Left Bank School of Filmmakers, which was a whole other crew, and she kind of crossed divisions there. She's making films all the way up until she died, and really making really interesting films. Her first one was a short called La Pointe Courte, 1954. She's often called, the godmother of the new wave. And she's linked to the Left Bank group of filmmakers. Chris Marker, who I can never show but I love, and Renaud, who I mentioned before, who both were a bit older and more political. So for Cleo from 5 to 7, I want you to think of a couple things while watching, and I have a discussion board post listed already, so be prepared to answer that. But here's a couple questions while watching the film. One, how does Varda use space to develop Cleo as a character? It's interesting too that the film moves between a documentary mode to a fictional mode, right? You can almost think of it sort of like Naked City with a semi-documentary feel, but not superficial necessarily like Naked City, so that's an interesting contrast. How does Varda prevent Cleo from becoming a superficial one-dimensional figure? She seems like a empty-headed, at least first, pop singer, but the film really troubles this notion. So how does it do so, right? And really kind of get from a woman's perspective. I'd say there's another question there too. How's this definitely a film from a woman's perspective? We're going to be watching three films made by women during the 60s and early 70s coming up. So, what are the links between these films? And finally, what are the various roles of popular culture in the film? The complicated ways in which it operates itself. So I hope you enjoy, and I look forward to reading the discussion boards. We won't be meeting next week, but I'll be reading the discussion boards, and again, we can meet one-on-one if we haven't done so or if you have questions. So talk to you soon. Bye-bye.